Courageous Conversations was launched in 2020 in the midst of the racial reckoning following the death of George Floyd, Regis Karpinski-Paquette, in order to have conversations around difficult and contentious issues that were happening and around which we needed to increase knowledge and awareness. So, for example, around systemic racism, around racial profiling, and around efforts to come to terms with what is to be done. We found two people who inspired these kinds of conversations historically and today, one of whom is Hebl and King, a Calgarian who became the first Black woman lawyer, and the other was Maya Angelou, the African-American author and poet who said that courage is the most important virtue because without courage, you cannot do anything else consistently. What inspires me is having the conversations with these leading thinkers from across campus, the country, and around the world who have been thinking deeply about these issues, who have been engaged with social justice movements, with university communities, with other intellectuals and activists, with an aim not just for understanding, but also for thinking about how the understanding can be mobilized in order to affect sustainable change.
Good afternoon. It's nice to see so many people here. My name is Sandy Hershkovitz, and I'm the Future Fund Professor of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the Haskayne School of Business. I'm also the Senior Associate Dean of Research. Thank you so much for joining us today for Courageous Conversations. And on behalf of Melinda Smith and myself, welcome to Working Together. To start today's conversation in a good way, I would like to acknowledge that the University of Calgary is located in the heart of southern Alberta in the traditional territories of the Peoples of Treaty 7, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. I'm grateful every day for the opportunity to live, work, and play in this beautiful city that we now call Calgary, and I strive to be a responsible steward of the land where I'm a guest. I'd like to now introduce Dustin, a traditional knowledge keeper who has kindly agreed to bless our event and share a few words of wisdom. Dustin is a member of the Apskopikuni South Pagan, part of the Blackfoot Confederacy, and brings with him a wealth of knowledge and experience. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Nursing from Montana State University and a Master's in Education Research from the University of Calgary. Currently, a fourth-year doctoral student in Community Health Sciences at the Cummings School of Medicine, his research focuses on traditional wellness programs, Indigenous research methodologies, and also public health approaches to treating addictions. Dustin is also a respected leader in the community, having served as a beaver bundle holder alongside his wife, and is a lead singer in the Kanatsomaitski, sorry about that, Crazy Dog Society, as well as a participant in the sacred Ukan Sun Dance ceremony. Dustin has dedicated his life to protecting and continuing the sacred Piikani ceremonial practices, and his presence here today is a profound reminder of the importance of culture, spirituality, and community in advancing knowledge and innovation. Dustin is joined by his wife, Shelley, who will help light the smudge. Shelley Eli, also a proud member of the Piikani Nation, is a fourth-year PhD student at the Workland School of Education at the University of Calgary. Her research focuses on Blackfoot language revitalization, land-based learning, and the oral storytelling traditions of the Piikani people. As a war bonnet holder and past Crow flag beaver bundle holder, she is deeply committed to preserving her cultural heritage. Her work reflects a passion for sharing the wisdom of her ancestors with future generations, particularly through language, storytelling, and traditional gender roles. Thank you. We'd like to invite you both up to the stage.
Okay. Niks okwa. Kit kanat sa mat sa mopua nuk titikoy. Ana koka Dustin Walter. Ni titsa de pinskat se ma sistakina. Ni duksa de PM skapi pikani. Ni doktok Bab Montana. Okay. So once again I said hi, my relatives. I'm really happy to see all of you. That's why I went like this. I am known as Dustin Walter, but my real name is Beaver Chief. That's what I said. And I come from Amskapi Pikani people, and my hometown is Bab, Montana. I was born in Canada, but it's only because I was so close to the border. My house is so close to the border that I was born in Canada and not the States, but I lived most of my life in the States, in the mountains. When thinking about that, I always tell this little story. So when I was born, they took me across the border, and of course I look very Caucasian, right? Because my mom is. And so when we got to the hospital in Cardston, Alberta, we went in and they were going to have me, I guess. And my dad walks in, he's a big Indian guy with braids, and they said, "Oh, this is a Native American child." And she's like, yeah, my husband, he's Native American. So they loaded my mom back up in the ambulance and took her across the street to the Blood Indian Hospital. I couldn't be born there, in their hospital. So when I think about this, I think about ethical behavior and difficult conversations, what we're going to talk about today, right? And we talk about nitsitapi. I say I'm a real person. So when you're thinking about having these conversations and broaching apart kind of lots of things, I really like that. So you have to be brave. You have to have courage, just like the Melinda's video there. You know, it takes courage in order to do this. You know, and I think about having difficult conversations. You have to come from a place that's real. And in Blackfoot, we talk about nitsitapi sini apai pios. I'm gonna live my life so that I hold true to Blackfoot virtues and be a real person and come from a real space of acceptance, kind heart, you know, ispopotopes, the relationship that we're building, because we're laying a real foundation. So if we don't ever talk about these kind of things in thinking about having these conversations, you know, it's going to be it's paramount that we're brave. But it's also, let's try to be real people about it. And sometimes that's kind of hard to figure out, but so many times in our language, especially in English language, there's little white lies, there's ways to take off, there's ways to soften the blow. In Blackfoot, we would never say that, because you're whitewashing it or painting over it so that it's false front. So it's very ditsitapi, real. Yeah. So be mindful that other person is supposed to be speaking of real heart. That's why it's gone with a good heart too. So we give them the benefit of the doubt. We have conversations that a lot of people can't have, and I'm hopeful that every one of you get blessings from these conversations, because make no mistake about it, what you're doing here is very powerful. This is what we talk about. You good to go? Okay, so my lovely assistant, Shelley. She's the real boss. I just follow her around. I make it look like I'm something I'm not, hey? But I want to give her the credit for this, because this morning we're about to do a smudge. So wherever you're at, you can just reach for the smoke and cleanse yourself 4 times with it, if you want to, if you feel comfortable doing it 4 times. And I'm going to sing a song before we do it, because this came from a conversation long ago in our creation. This song I'm going to sing is a song that was given to one of our heroes named Scarface, Wapski. And he went and saw the son, and the son was able to help him and these kind of different things. A giver of life, was able to help him with some things in his life, but he said, take this song back to your people, and it will always help you. And when you sing this song, we know that you're calling us to prayer. And that's same with the smudge as well. It's calling to prayer and to cloak ourselves and cleanse ourselves all. Anyway, we'll just say. So, through that conversation, we have something that's passed down through an oral history since before the Ice Age. I mean, my people, there's a document, Dusty Crawford did his DNA, and he's got the oldest DNA on the planet that they say at 15,000 years. So we were here first, guys, except but so this is around the time of the last Ice Age. So this is what we say. This song has been passed down since then, and this is the power of communication. And this is the power of having difficult conversations. Say, way hey ah hey, way hey ah hey, way hey ah hey, way hey ah hey, way hey oh hey hi hi way hey oh hey hi 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 oh way hey. Way hey ah hey, way hey ah hey, way hey ah hey, way ah hey hi hi, way oh hey hi 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 oh hi hi apisiduki hi istibatpip I would not be not those. An expomot sa moch kinses o moch ni skinny di match stay up. Moch kinses o moch ni skinny di match to kicks. Ayo, not be not twos. I don't want piece to do it, I'll get so cool. I came up picking on, I came up peepit, say namatapio. I get the gaku mem ach, nitsita beamix. Ayo, not be not twos. Ayu kipitaki kokomikisam. Ayu managapi. Ayu pa inakoto kitasamo ikan. Po ispomogit ayu spomokina. Existoi. Ispomogit iskaipum. Ayu wanapi natusi. Anuxpomot sa kematukina na nitsita pisini a pios. Ayu wanapi natus. Ayu kipitaki kokobikisam. Ayu managapi. Ayu pa inagoto kitasamo ikan. What is spomagit ayu smamo kinan. Asetso atsaman. Napios. Somi pa the piece in akamutani. Akamutani. Hey, everybody go like this. Hey. You have to go like hey, like that, really simple. Right? That's our thankfulness, right? Anyway, that's it. I talked about in the prayer that everything goes good in these conversations, so that we can lead others onto a better path, and that we can stay resilient in the face of challenges. I also talked about living the real life and being real people and genuine in all that you do. I encourage you all to do that and be mindful of good heart, kindness. Get my people sin. Treat my people with kindness. That's what I asked. Because I love my people, I said. And I love the real way of life, is what I said. Because it keeps us a steward going home. And then at the end I said, so we can raise our children fully to old age and a long life. And then at the end I say, kamutani, which is a bit like amen or whatever, but it means for health and survival. Kenya.
Thank you, Dustin and Shelley. Thank you for that beautiful blessing. We would like to offer you a gift with our gratitude for the time and wisdom that you shared with us. Thank you so much. Today we're here with Doctors Mikki Hebl, Eden King, and Melinda Smith to discuss scientific evidence surrounding the need for and best practices of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Drawing on insights from Mikki and Eden's latest book, Working Together, Practicing the Science of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, we'll discuss research about science-based best practices across the employment cycle that consider diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies for attracting, selecting, and retaining employees. At the forefront of this discussion will be the recent work regarding demographic shifts that are projected in the US and beyond, and the types of discrimination that individuals with stigmatized social identities experience. Their research spans work not only on race and gender, but also on sexual orientation, weight, religion, neurodiversity, pregnancy, medical diagnoses, and age. Wow. I would like to now introduce our panel. Dr. Melinda Smith is the Vice Provost and Associate Vice President of Research, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the University of Calgary, and the creator of these courageous conversations. Dr. Smith holds a PhD in political science from the University of Alberta and an MA, MDA, and BA magna cum laude in political science and criminal justice from Western Michigan University. She's a co-author of The Equity Myth, Racialization and Indigeneity at Canadian Universities, co-editor of Nuances of Blackness in the Canadian Academy, Teaching, Learning, and Researching While Black, editor of 3 books on Africa, as well as co-editor of Critical Concepts, An Introduction to Politics and States of Race, Critical Race, Feminism from the 21st Century. Wow. Dr. Smith serves on several national bodies, including SSHRC, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, for our US guests, and Executive Statistics Canada Immigration and Ethnocultural Statistical Advisory Committee, and Innovation Science and Economic Development Canada, External EDI Advisory Board. Wow, okay, so that was Melinda. Let's have a round of applause for her. I'm so excited to introduce our 2 speakers. Drs. Hebl King and Mikki Hebl are academic rock stars in my area of research in equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I'm a little bit of a fangirl, I have to say. Mikki and Eden might not remember this, but I ran into them in an airport once following a conference, and I fangirled all over them at that time. I invited them to Calgary to give a talk, to which they politely agreed, and probably thinking they'd never hear from me again. Sorry, guys. I'm pretty persistent. Mikki and Eden have committed their lives to studying equity, diversity, and inclusion at work. They've published their research on every EDI topic you can think of, which, as you just heard. And not only that, but they disseminate their research broadly through consulting, speaking engagements, and training. They've collectively supervised over 100 honors, masters, and PhD students who've gone on to share their knowledge. I've supervised like 3 students, so that's just to give you a little context. They're incredible. So their impact has a multiplier effect as their students train new students, and on and on. Dr. Hebl King is the Lynette S. Autry Professor of Industrial Organizational Psychology at Rice University, where she's pursuing a program of research that seeks to guide the equitable and effective management of diverse organizations. This research, which has yielded over 100 publications and has been featured in outlets such as the New York Times, Good Morning America, and Harvard Business Review, addresses 3 primary themes: current manifestations of discrimination and barriers to work-life balance in organizations, consequences of such challenges for its targets in the workplace, individuals and organizational strategies for reducing discrimination and increasing support for families. Dr. King has also partnered with organizations to improve diversity climate, increase fairness in selection systems, and to design and implement diversity training programs. She has served as president of the Society for IO Psychology and is currently co-editor of the Journal of Business and Psychology. So I'm going to ask for a round of applause for Eden. Mikki and Eden are longtime friends, and if I understand correctly, Mikki, you supervised Eden's undergrad, master's, and PhD, is that right? Yes, so they have been joined at the hip for many years. Dr. Mikki Hebl is the Martha and Henry Malcolm Lovett Chair of Psychological Sciences with an additional appointment in the Jones Business School. Mikki's research focuses on workplace discrimination and the ways both individuals and organizations can remediate such discrimination and successfully optimize diversity. She has approximately 200 publications, 21 teaching awards, including the most prestigious national award called the Cherry Award, research grants from the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Health, and several gender-related research awards. For instance, in 2014, she was honored with the Academy of Management's SAGE Award for Lifetime Achievement in Research Advancing Knowledge of Gender and Diversity in Organizations. The Academy of Management is our biggest society. And in 2018, she was selected as the Woman in Academia with Outstanding Career Award from the Business School of the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. It is my pleasure to welcome Mikki, Eden, and Melinda to the stage.
Before you go, can we say thank you so very, very much? Thank you again.
So good afternoon, everyone. And again, let me join in thanking the Knowledge Keepers, Dustin Walter and Shelley Eli, for their smudging and starting us off in a good way. We appreciate it. So my name is Melinda Smith, as has been said, and I've had the privilege of serving as I'm a political scientist by training and having the privilege of serving as a vice provost and the Associate Vice President, Research EDI at University of Calgary for the past 4.2 years. So it's my honor to welcome those of you who are in the room and those of you who are online. And this Courageous Conversations, as the video said, started in the pandemic, so it was all virtual. And so this is only the second time we are gathered together in a room. And so, thanks to our guests, you're reacquainting us with sociality. Thank you. So as we said, Courageous Conversation was launched in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd. It's coming up to the 5th anniversary of that, the racial reckoning. But as the book by Mikki Hebl and King point out, there are other important aspects of that time, Me Too. We can't ignore the kind of critical disability movements, the movements for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, which continues and requires even more attention today, both in the United States and in Canada, and particularly in the province of Alberta. So these themes couldn't be more timely. But their work also highlight the enduring themes that those of us who have been in the trenches for decades know. It's questions of harassment and discrimination, questions of, I can't believe you're still talking about childcare or family-friendly policies that would enable people to thrive in the academy and in the workplace. So their work is a tour de force, and I'm glad each of you have the opportunity to have a copy of it, and are here to listen to them today. So let's come to the topic for today, and let me give you some kind of housework. For anyone who wants to submit a question, and if you haven't done so already, you can use the go-to Slido.com with the code 2976659. That's in the back of us there. Or scan the QR code to go to the site. Now, we are having courageous conversations, and trust me, we will. So, thank you. You fired up, ready to go?
I'm fired up. Let's go.
They just got off the plane not too long ago, so welcome to Calgary, Canada's most beautiful city. It's one of the world's #1 places to live. It's actually factual, and also Google it. And thank you for joining us. I'm delighted to have you here. And so throughout this session, I'm going to be using EDI, which is what we typically use in Canada, and DEI interchangeably. We can talk about some of the nuances and differences with them. But let's get started with the book. I want to ask you, so we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty yet. Can you share with us more about what led you to write the book? What surprised you in doing the research for the book? And in terms of what you found along the way? And what lessons have you learned since you released the book in terms of conversations with people?
Okay, I'm going to start. But first, I'm going to say thank you so much for joining us, Melinda, and for hosting this. And also, we have to start by just saying a big thank you to Sandy. Thank you so much for bringing all these people together, both in person, on this stage, the knowledge holders who have left, and also the people who are online. Thank you so much. So I'm going to make Okay. The book is called Working Together, and as I know, you're going to be really surprised to know that Eden and I aren't the same age. It only gets better from here. I met her when she was an undergraduate, and as Sandy said, I worked with her. And I worked with her from her undergraduate thesis to her graduate thesis to being one of the most excited colleagues in the world to find out we were going to hire her back to our own program. And I will tell you, I wish for everyone, for you to be able to write a book called Working Together with the person you love to work together with the most. And that is really how the book got started. Now, I'm going to give you I'm going to speed it up, but just saying, there's nobody I'd love to work together with. Getting on an airplane with her and sitting next to her for 4 hours was a joy. This is my best friend, so it's my work best friend and my personal best friend, so I love you. Okay, so what happened is, after the 2016 election, I cried. I was at a Adele concert when it went down, and now I get amygdala response every time I hear Adele. And so I decided what I was going to do was I didn't need to teach graduate students. I didn't need to teach undergraduates. I needed to make a difference. I was going to teach MBAs. Yeah. So I started teaching them. It was first called Inclusive Leadership, and then after the George Floyd murder, it was changed. I didn't change it. It was changed to DEI, and now I think it's called Leading Change again, which tells you something about what's going on. Excuse me, Eden and I both are getting over a cold or in the middle of it, so sorry about that too. All right, so anyway, what I will just say, quick story is that I kept hearing MBA CEOs talking about the meritocracy. I kept hearing, why can't we just let the best candidate win? I kept hearing these things, and I thought, we got to get together and write about this. And sometimes we would go and give talks, and people would say, where is all this written? And I said, let's get together. Let's talk about what we're teaching the MBAs, what we're teaching as best practices. Let's do it based on what we've done together. And that's really how the book was born. I will tell you, we don't make any money from the books. It goes to profit. If we had published that book probably 3 years earlier, it would have been a big bestseller. Now it's like everybody wants DEI to DIE. And so I think we've learned a lot, and I think even thinking about DEI now, after that book has been published and the world is once again on a pendulum, I think we think all kinds of things too that are somewhere between shocking and sad and worried and exhausted.
There's not much to add to that other than that she's my bestie too. And the world that we're living in this moment is very different feels very different than the world we were living in when we started this journey of writing this book together. And every day we want to be able to contribute to this conversation, and to try to use the best evidence that we have to bring science to practice, to translate what we know from the science to people's lives. And that's really the, I guess, gap that we're trying to fill.
So thanks for that. So in the room, you'll have a lot of people who are researchers, administrators, students, community people. And one of the things I like about the title of your book is that you highlight that it is about the science, the practice of practicing the science of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and which just, in a way, unsettles or disrupts this idea that it's just opinion, there's no evidence to support it, there are no better or more promising ways of doing this work. So is that why you picked the science of the work, or was there something more that you wanted to illustrate, demonstrate, but using the word science of?
I think, thank you for the question. I think science, the social scientific basis of this work is really important to us as scholars. That is our perspective that we bring to bear. That is our expertise as we navigate this world together. And so we really wanted to provide evidence-based solutions or strategies or approaches. We acknowledge and recognize that the science itself is limited, and there's a lot of things that we still need to study, or we need to study better, but we wanted to give folks a starting place for making change that they could feel was substantiated in a robust literature, in a robust science, in the best evidence that we have.
Okay, thanks. So let's deal with the elephant in the room, one of them. Okay, so we are in the midst of backlash, which disproportionately impacts women. And we have many, many cases to highlight this, not the least of the many. So we could start with Hillary Clinton. That was the moment when we had this election that probably surprised many. But since then, there's been this spiraling kind of pushback, and I think backlash is the best word for it. And it's, as I said, it's disproportionately impacting women. We can think of all the presidents of the Ivy School. We can think of all the, in the US, the DEI chief diversity officers at Harvard or at Johns Hopkins or at Delaware County. I guess the question for me is, what do you see as the best way to respond? I think, well, part of it would be the research, but does it necessarily resonate to respond to this backlash? What do you think, though, really accounts for it? Like, what's behind the intensity of the backlash in this moment, which I can say has some resonance here in Canada?
Yeah, so let me try to take a stab at that. Actually, we just wrote an article, again, post-book, that really looks at trying to think about why there is this backlash. And one of the things we've uncovered is sort of a two-pronged response to some of these DEI initiatives. The first one is affective responses. So people have fears. They are afraid their jobs are going to be taken away. They're afraid there's not a space for them. They're afraid of all the change going on with AI. They're afraid of immigrants. They're afraid of the rhetoric that comes to them. The second, I think, affective response is one of animosity. So we don't like people who are different. We prefer people who are like us. And I think to the extent that people have simplified DEI initiatives in terms of one group out there or some group is getting something, that is something that leads to negativity. So I think we have these kind of affective responses, and then we also have cognitive responses, and some of these have to do with this belief in a zero-sum game. If you're getting something, I'm not getting something. You know, it's this idea of meritocracy, like, I worked hard for this. This is my position. Who do you think you are coming in to take this position? So I think there's also these cognitive things too. I think, you know, with the way that misinformation, which I think is another cognitive mechanism, has swept our world, I think that's another thing, is people are getting information incorrectly. So if you ask people just what are DEI initiatives, a lot of times people will say, well, it's giving Black individuals like space that they're not good enough to get and they shouldn't get. And it's like, really? That's what you see DEI as? Because DEI is so much bigger. So it's taking this construal and really narrowing it down. And I think those three things that, those two things, the affective and the cognitive, play off of each other and create these behaviors. And the behaviors are, now I'm going to have backlash, now I'm not going to buy in, and now I'm not going to give, resources and things to these. So I think that's kind of what's happening. There's a lot of cognitive and affective reactions, and people are personalizing them. And then we're in a context where there's many cults of extreme conservatism that knows how to fan the flames. And I think we're dealing with a context that is ripe with that as well.
So then the question is, what do you do about it? Anybody have a solution? I think one of the ways that we have started to frame that question and try to appeal to a broader audience is to try to break down, or at least reduce some of those reactions. And so to try to minimize those affective and cognitive responses, so that immediate response to when you hear the word DEI that you think unfair, or anti-white or anti-male. And so I think we've started to talk about broader sets of initiatives that help everyone, and about DEI as an approach or a perspective that, when done well, helps everyone to feel included, helps everyone feel like they belong, helps everyone feel like they have the resources they need to do their jobs effectively. And so that's sort of how we're trying to, I guess, meet this resistance or this backlash. To some extent.
And to go off of that, we call it curb cut effects, right? So curb cut is not intended just for the person who, it was originated for, which was people coming back from, in the United States. It was started in Kalamazoo, Michigan, for individuals who had come back from the war, and they were using wheelchairs, and so they had to do curb cuts. But it doesn't help just people who use wheelchairs. It helps, the person pulling the wagon, the person on a bicycle, the person who is using crutches, who is, just frail and doesn't want to step off the curb. It's helping everyone. And I think when we think about DEI initiatives as curb cuts, we move away from just race and gender, and we think, how many out there are wearing glasses? How many out there use closed caption? How many out there, need more space or use universal design or have neurodiversity? And so when we start to broaden what it means to have DEI and include DEI, then I think it's really scary that we're shutting down offices and, trying to end these programs. So again, I think at the individual level, it's really figuring out how to get rid of the misinformation, how to widen our definitions. And we need to do that not just at the individual level, but also at the organization and at the society level. So, there's PSAs, public service announcements. This is the time for public service announcements. Remember, I don't know if you had them growing up, but it was like, friends don't let friends drink and drive, right? This is your brain on eggs, or something about drugs. This is your brain on drugs. That was a long flight. Okay. Anyway, I think it's time for public service announcements. I think it's time for us to we're going to clearly have to elect leaders to undo all the damage that our leaders have done. So there's a lot of efforts that we still need to do.
So thanks for that. So one of the questions from the audience is, given what you're saying, though, there are still, and there's a lot of research that suggests there's still a lot of there are a lot of corporations who are backpedaling, even from their commitments they made 4 years ago after George Floyd. We can think about Starbucks, all of them having moments where they're going to have special workshops now. Molson Coors among others, backing off their EDI, DEI initiatives. And so something is missing because these corporations are doing it. They have access to knowledge. They have access to evidence. Does that suggest they were engaged in performative activities? Were they ever committed to these or do you think that pressure is coming from their boards or their shareholders? Where is this pressure coming from? Or people boycotting their products? I mean, because there could be a number of things coming at them while they engage in this activity, but it begs the question then about what do they think DEI is or EDI are the three different things, that they would back off it rather than go on a public service announcement campaign.
I gotta make a stab at this, and somebody out there, I don't know which one of you it was, wrote a paper on this, and I read it on the plane. It's your DEI U-turns. Who are you out there? Yes, you. I'm gonna give you credit. That was a great paper. I read it, okay? What's your name? Camelia, your paper was great. It kind of addresses this, right? It kind of said, let's see how I do. It says there's sort of three reasons that this is happening. One, it's happening because of laws. I'm not going to get the names right, the names of the actual things, but first of all, organizations are being prevented, and institutions, by the laws. If they're getting any funding from the state, they can't do it anymore. So we're seeing this in Texas with, oh my gosh, our friends across the street at the medical centers have moved from DEI offices to Office of Professionalism. Really? But that's because they get state funding. So some of it is prevented by laws. The second one is that there are industry norms. So it's about what are the other industries doing. And I will just say, I'm going to say this tomorrow too, is I think it's not just about what industries are doing, it's what is the least amount that the other industries are doing, because business is money. And if I promised you 5 million or 5 billion and now nobody else is doing it, I don't want to pay that much. That's something else I can use for AI or something else that I believe. We see across time diversity waxes and wanes, and it's really good when the funding is there and really bad when the funding isn't there. And then the third thing was the leaders and the executive board members, and I'm going to say, what's your last name so they can look this all up when it's published? O'Brien? Yeah, Camelia Bryan, that's her paper. I stole her best ideas. That's what we do. Did I do okay? Okay, Eden, back to you.
I would just add, I think we've seen that where we live. I work at a private institution in Houston, Texas. My partner works at a public institution in the same city. At his institution, they literally shuttered the LGBTQ center. They closed it. They take out every title that has diversity in it. He's a medical doctor. They have to teach medical students about a variety of issues related to identity, and so they're able to kind of twist it, tweak the language enough to not risk their funding from the state. On the other hand, the institution where we work is not perfect, but we have the flexibility at the moment to double down on our efforts. Undergraduates at our institution are required to take a class in their first semester of college on critical dialogues and diversity. They're required. And that's just one example of what they're trying to do. So I think those institutional and legal constraints are real, and I don't think they can be minimized.
Okay, thanks for that. Let me ask a question now about. So I mean, there were questions that asked you and I think you speak to that, where organizations dropping the D, diversity, for example, they're dropping the E, for example, or they're doubling down on inclusivity. So there's something at stake in them thinking that the language game, the nomenclature matters in terms of what they do, or in terms of how the reception to the broader community. I'm not sure that's that kind of. I'm not sure about that. So, but you can speak to it if you think it matters. Because that's one of the questions that people have. Does the nomenclature matter, or is it actually the substance of what the change that we're trying to effect? So because you also see people talking, but so JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, or they add belonging, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Do you think these are going to make a difference? This name game, name change.
Yes and no. That's the best psychology answer you'll get. Yes and no. I think on the one hand, the nomenclature has changed as a reflection of the emphasis in public discourse and in academia, right? So I think our scholarship started to focus on diversity, on demographic representation, because we were seeing these census projections. This was like in the 80s and 90s. We were seeing these census projections that by the year 2050, the United States of America would be what they call majority minority. In other words, fewer white people than people of color in the United States. And so people were really focused on numbers, on representation, on diversity. Then people realized, scholars and others, it's not just enough to count. We actually have to make sure that people feel like that they are included, that their voice matters. And so inclusion really became at the forefront of that conversation. And I think throughout, and I think worldwide, there has been a question around equity or inequity, also equality, inequality. And those issues to some extent came to the forefront with the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. And so then we actually started talking about anti-racism, anti-sexism, and those were the words that were used. So to some extent, they reflect what is being discussed and what is salient in both the public discourse and in scholarship. But on the other hand, so this is the no for me, is we need to be talking about all these things that matter. I don't personally care what we call them, as long as we're paying attention to them. The substance is what really matters to me, but we need to have something we can call them. And to strike those words out and to say you can't use those words, we can find other words, but then we have to have agreement about what those are. And so it's pushing us back. It's setting back those movements every time we have to change them in response to an external force.
I just agree so much. I mean, and I think just to point out Oscar Holmes here, because now I know all of your research, okay, but he just wrote something, SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Management, decided they were going to take equity out. And he has a nice op-ed on why equity belongs. And I think it does us a disservice if we are saying, yeah, we should take that out. We should do. No, we're not fighting that fight. What we're fighting is people who are trying to just X out whole things. So we go back to critical race theory where it started, or maybe affirmative action, or people just vilifying words and changing what they mean. And again, if they do that too much, right, we lose track of what they mean, and we don't just lose the words, we lose what those words were indicating. So again, I think we don't change the words. What we do is educate people on what DEI is and how elaborate it is. It's structured interviews, y'all. We've been doing DEI stuff since the beginning of time. Okay, Eden and I never thought of us as DEI researchers 20 years ago because those words they weren't in the foray, but that is what we do. And DEI is this big culminating thing. If you want to add A, if you want to add I think we should add a lot of words to it. But at a certain point in time, it's like, let's not argue over what we're calling it. Let's just make sure people aren't taking it away.
Equity and excellence. So part of the conundrum we face with advancing EDI, DEI, DEIB is that people believe these initiatives are fundamentally unfair. So that's one kind of argument. They're unfair. And some may say reverse discrimination in the US and in Canada. But there's also the belief that we are dealing with either admitting to universities and colleges or hiring people who are underqualified, who lack excellence or merit or quality. And so you draw on science, draw on evidence. I think the evidence in Canada, and I'm happy to have a conversation about that, suggests this is just false, yet it persists. How do you respond to this belief in the trade-off that the more diversity you have, the less excellence you have, or that there's somehow these things are related?
Well, I mean, I think that's the calling card that's what people like to say. That's the easy game. Diversity means lower excellence. And I can't tell you how many times I taught the executive MBAs where I'd hear them say, but they got the job only because they were a woman, or they got the job only because they were black, or because they were URM. And first of all, I want to say again that when we equate DEI with just race and gender, we are doing DEI a major, major disservice. So that's number one. But number two is that rarely happens. So when there are cases where somebody says they got the job because they are black, what I want to say is, how do you know? Like, did you look at the qualifications? Like, was there actually a test and it was just that one test? And did they get a 98 and you got a 99? Like, what do you mean? Like, you can't take a vita and experience, but I worked more hours. I worked more years. I had the position beforehand. And again, that's what my student is studying, white privilege, right? A lot of this is the privilege of the position holder who thinks that this is their position, and if it's not there anymore, somebody else is getting it and they can't possibly be as good as us. So that's the short answer. I would say that by and large, for the most part, it's just, if you look at one position and you compare all of the number of white individuals who could have a 99 and all of the individuals who are non-white who could have a 99, yes, there's probably more people that can have a 99 who are white just by the fact that there are more of them. But I want to articulate, the world doesn't work in 99s and 98s. It works in a variety of different things that go to the equation. And so I think it's so reductionistic, but it's used. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, the presumption is that that test, that interview, that whatever criteria is somehow an objective reality, and of course neglects the consideration of every single thing that went before that in creating the test and preparing people for the test and whatever it may be, and just the systems that persist in society that are just inherently unequal.
And then one more thing. The 99 and 98 don't predict the job performance. Sorry, I forgot that part. They don't. They predict first-year grades.
But this then leads me to the question: why is it? I mean, so we think diversity does a lot of good things. It means a lot of good things. So is it that we have a reductionist understanding of diversity, and we have spent inadequate time talking about what diversity actually does in terms of, say, critical thinking, diversity in terms of creativity, diversity in terms of innovation, better teams? There's a lot of research in this area. And presumably a lot of these leaders read Forbes, Harvard Business Review. They understand the value proposition for being an inclusive leader. So what's the catch? Why isn't that resonating with them such that they're prepared to even invest in changing those who don't have access to all of that knowledge? So do we underemphasize the value proposition for diversity? what diversity does, the benefits of diversity.
I think historically, like the past 10, 20 years, we have not underemphasized that. I think that message, as you said, is out there. I think that's an oversimplification of the research. And, in our book, we talk about the financial imperative, but we also talk about the realistic imperative that we are just diverse. Like, you can try to hide from it, but that's where we are. And then also the moral imperative. So we do present all three of those perspectives. However, I think it's insufficient, right?
Yes.
To your point, any one of those cases or even all three together aren't moving the needle right now. And to me, that's a reflection of all of those other influences that you mentioned earlier, right? Whether it's the stakeholders or the consumers, or the fear about litigation and legislation. I think those are the sort of external forces. One of Mikki's former grad students, who was in my cohort, did her dissertation 20 years ago, something like that, on how support for diversity initiatives goes down when the economics goes down, when people feel like there's fewer resources, right? And so she did it with experiments. She looked at longitudinal data from multiple points in time, and basically whether you manipulate it or whether you just measure it, when people think the economy is bad, they're less likely to want to devote resources to DEI. So to me, that's like one of these external forces that's not acting in favor. And we also saw the opposite, right, at least to some extent, in 2020, where we saw an increasing emphasis and attention. So to me, it is sort of the combination of multiple factors all at once.
All right. There's somebody out there that wants a little bit of a more optimistic direction. So what are the emerging trends or areas of focus do you see as crucial to the future of EDI, DEI in higher education?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is we have to look in at our own science, and we have to acknowledge that we don't have a lot of answers, and that we also have to do more of it. We have to be better at figuring out what is the best way to do diversity training. Diversity training is a $1 billion industry, and it's been sort of, sometimes you see the people practicing diversity training, and it's not scientific. So we have to, one, know more scientific evidence for all of the areas of diversity, and we have to be better with practitioners about practicing those things. So I think the first thing for us to do is look inward and say, let's keep doing research on these things. It's very important. There's new emerging types of diverse individuals who need to be addressed. There's new ways of thinking about how we best serve those individuals. I think we need to definitely think about now, how do we stop the backlash? Like, how do we stop the death of DEI programs? And that's a big one to me. And it is linked with a lot of things going on. It's linked with a misinformation campaign. It's linked with the extreme polarizations. It's linked with some very right-wing conservative movements going on. It's linked with fears of immigration. And I think this is all places where we have to do research to see how our issues fit in with this bigger context. Because, as Kamala said, you have to remember the context. She did say that. Okay. She did. Okay. Sorry, I had to put that in there. That's a positive thing.
I would just add, thank you for making it positive or pushing us to be more optimistic. I have to believe it will get better. I do believe we will continue to make incremental change that over time, I can never get the quote quite right, but it's a Martin Luther King quote about the arc of justice. Yes, I have to believe that, partly because we are here today, that we were invited to be part of this conversation, that you took the time out of your day to sit here and have this conversation with us. And I also have to believe that because I'm a mom, I have children, and I want a future for them that's beautiful. That's what we all deserve. And so, yes, I am optimistic, and I think we can do it by working together.
And one more thing about that, too, is when I started, like 26 years ago in SIOP, Society of Biopsychology, there weren't many diversity-related panels or symposium. It's now one of the most researched topics. It's not going away. They can call it whatever they want to call it, but we're not folding up our tents and going away. Look at the people sitting in the room next to you. Look at the people in this province of Canada. Look at the people in Houston where we live. Like, our world is getting more diverse. So this is something that, it may be a last stand, but I think that, what you do is when times get hard, you dig in and you keep going.
No, but there is the argument. So you raised the comment about the fact that we are all heading for this trajectory of majority minority. That's actually true in Canada. So we are in a province where 40% of the population are racialized. Significant, one of the fastest growing population is the first people, Indigenous peoples. But all across the prairie, this is changing. So that demographic shift is leading to those who feel like this is the great replacement. And they are anxious about it in terms of their culture, values, all kinds of things. And so it does beg the question of whether we are responding to that in a way that actually addresses those concerns. But that demographic shift also means that people are looking around, and the type of immigrants, the background of immigrants who are coming into North America are different from historically. So they're not coming from the Irish famine, they're not coming from other kinds of programs, they're coming from Europe, Germany, Scotland, Ireland, elsewhere. They're coming from Asia, multiple Asian countries. They're coming, so the hyperdiversity, or superdiversity, not just diversity. So it raises a question about how we work well together, how we teach well together, and how we live well together. And so I guess for me, the question is, if we move away from just the singular idea of diversity, including this identity group, and think about hyperdiversity or superdiversity, the language the sociologists use, what does that require of us? I'm thinking here of Putnam's bowling alone, for example. What does that require of us in a very practical sense about what we need to do, right? Because it's about what we need to do to close the gap for people who fear their neighbors, because they don't know their neighbors. Like, what's the basic we have to go back to? Okay, and then you could, if you said you were referring to Martin Luther King, you could now go to I Have a Dream.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one. I forgot about that. I'm speculating. I'm not a sociologist. But my sense is that we need to invest in our communities in a way that I think about, we talk about like a zero-sum game where you think my loss, your gain is my loss, or that there's a fixed pie of resources, that there's only so many things to go around, and that at the end of the day, someone's gonna get some and someone's not. I think we have to get past that. We have to create an expandable pie. We have to create different options, different opportunities, so it doesn't feel like it's one or the other. And I guess one of the ways that I see that playing out, again, not my expertise, so total speculation, is in the United States, in public schools. I see the allocation of resources is very disparate across schools, across districts, along a variety of hyper diverse dimensions. And I think that's where, the next generation, or that's where our children are learning about difference, and that's where it could be broken down if we encourage it, if we allow it. So I think that's just one. You asked for a practical. that's one place I think we should emphasize.
And this is why we work well together, because she's taking a bottom up and I'm going to take a top down, and I'm going to say, like, I'm one of the first scholars that I came to love in our field is Alice Agley, who said it's the distribution of roles in society that will ultimately change behaviors. And I think as long as we have power holders who are so white and so male, we're going to continue to have differences. When we start to think of the workplace as a woman's workplace, when we realize in the United States we need paid family leave, like we need structures. That would be the work of Alicia Grandy. I also want to call out Lilia Cortina, who does civility. Okay. Sorry, thank you all for being here. But it's all of our research that shows these structural inadequacies that continue to give people the power who have the power. And I think it's really about teaching those individuals they don't need to fear. There's still going to be a place for them. By the way, there's fewer and fewer of them, so let's not get scared because there's enough jobs for many of us, but we need to change things. And it's going to involve people who don't look like you. And so again, I think this election is the perfect time to say, in some ways, does the old, white man who is powerful and wealthy prevail? Or does this new sort of multi-dimensional individual who really represents new and hope prevail? And I think this is what we're testing, not just in the United States, but in many different countries. Are we moving forward with our jumping into this pool of diversity and saying we embrace this, or are we living in fear and pushing it away? I think that's happening many places.
So that brings, I'm a political scientist, so I have to ask a question about power. You highlight, and I know we can talk about the demographic distribution of leaders, and I would say it's very similar in the United States as it is in Canada, including in Alberta, where it's not very diverse. So your population is diverse, your student body is diverse, your professoriate, and then moving up the food chain, it's not. At the same time, you have 60%, 40, 50, 60% of the undergraduate are women, or you have increasingly racialized. If you look at Canada, the data suggests in terms of attainment that racialized people have similar attainment levels as the white population, generally speaking. And that's all racialized population, whether it's Black, South Asian, East Asian, Japanese, Chinese, West Asian, all have similar. But you don't see that reflected the higher up organizations you go. That's one kind of point. So the question is, how are we going to change this? The second thing is, when you get racialized leaders or women in these roles, you also have, they're not there for long. The glass cliff, for example, or the concrete ceiling that you're dealing with. So how are we going to change? What do we need to do to change this leadership pipeline to make it more diverse and inclusive? So that we're not talking about, because I feel like we've been talking about this for decades, and it's not changing. So something has to give. And the question is, what?
Yeah, I think, okay, so first change is happening. It's just happening at such a slow pace. So even when I think about, I was the third tenured woman in my department. For a very long time, for 20 years, there were only 2 or 3 women in the department. And now there's more women than there are men. Obviously, that's an N of 1. We are seeing change. When I look out at the undergraduates and I ask them, how many of you are feminists? They're like, there's gender equality. Like, I don't need to be a feminist. And for them, there is. They're not seeing it at the level that they are, and that's great. There's just as many, if not more, women going to medical school, going to law school. So we're pushing it. We're pushing women up. But then we have, I think, again, the child care issue where we're just not supporting them. And we're not seeing men support child care. This is really Eden's area too. so you can address this more, but it's like until we see men doing childcare, until we see men doing teaching jobs, until we see men doing these jobs, and women actually getting into leadership. We know women make different decisions as leaders. They just do. And it's unfortunate that there are a lot of glass cliffs, but imagine a scenario where really 50% of positions at the CEO level are held by women. Just imagine that. Imagine what that would look like and how quickly change would happen in organizations. And again, I think some of the things, there is some good things about the pandemic, not a ton of good things, but a few. And one is it really escalated our ability to think about flexible work schedules. And I think that's good, and that will help women. But I'm going to give it over to Eden for you to think about and answer, because I don't know for sure what's going to make it faster. We're moving, but it just feels like we move a little and then we move back.
And if I could push Eden to respond to the fact that, I mean, there is a lot of research that, yes, in Canada, for example, the data suggests that women are moving into these spaces, but they're not racialized, they're not queer, they're not women with disabilities. So how do we increase, so we need an intersectional lens, but we need to talk about, when we say women, what do we mean, and how inclusive is our concept? And I'll also break it down a little bit to talk about non-binary folks too, because when I think about childcare or family-friendly policies, we don't even talk about what does a queer family require? What does a blended family policy look like? So, all right, you're the expert.
Yeah,
She said.
she did say that. She did say that. I think, so certainly family care needs are important for families of all types. Mm-hmm. I think your point is well taken, though, that it's not this monolithic group of women. It's all of these intersections that matter and that are underrepresented in the positions of power. And I guess the one thing that I think about is the idea of the prototype of a leader, and which is basically our expectation about what a leader looks like or should be, and the behavior, what they look like, how they should behave, what a good leader is. So that's an experiment that's been done for like 50 years, asking undergraduates or people on an internet survey to talk about what makes a good leader, like what are those characteristics. And I think that's what we need to shift, right? So it needs to be all of those things, all of those identities. It can't just be, that the picture that people see in their minds when they think about a good leader can't just be one thing. We need to make it all the things, and there's lots of different ways to be a good leader, and that people with all of these different colors, with all of these different sexual orientations, with all of these different religious backgrounds, like all of these things that make us who we are, those are things that can be reflected in good leadership. And so I think it's really about changing the prototype. How do we do that? There's not one way, right? Like none of these, these are big, complex issues. None of them are going to be handled or dealt with a singular solution. But it's like all of the things put together, right? So how do we change how kids think about what a leader is? How do we change in an organization who gets promoted and how we evaluate candidates for promotion while thinking about changing the leader prototype, right? And so it's all of these little actions together that I think can create change. Now that's also why it's so slow, right? It's because you need all of those things. And just doing one of them isn't going to turn the dial very far. So I do think it's sort of like a systematic, along the lines of public service announcements, but integrated throughout society in TikToks and in Instagram and in all of the different sources of information that we interact with every day, putting out these new ideas, reinforcing, actually they're not new, reinforcing these images of what good leaders are.
Thank you. So I have a question about, in your book you talk about subtle versus kind of overt discrimination, or some would say subtle exclusions. Others refer to microaggressions. Can you say a little bit more about why these distinctions are important? But then, what do you think are some of the better ways in which institutions are dealing with them?
Sure. So that's really how a lot of our research got started, was looking at not just overt types of discrimination. I don't like you because you're X or because you're a member of X, but really looking beyond that to say, what are we missing if we just look at this overt type of illegal discrimination? And so we very quickly got into looking at what are the signs, how do I posture toward you, how much eye contact do I have toward you? And it's interesting because there was some research done by Jennifer Richardson and Nicole Shelton, and they looked at black and white relationships, and they found that after individuals were interacting, the white individuals said, yeah, I think that went pretty well. We said all these different things. It seemed to go pretty well. When you asked the black individuals, they said, oh, I looked at the nonverbals. It didn't go so well. And it's because there's distrust, right? And so very quickly, we became interested in looking at what are these subtle types of behaviors that may lead to individuals feeling that they're not welcome. This is really similar to work that Lilia Cortina does. We think about it as incivilities, and incivilities that continuously are directed toward a person because of their membership in a group. And Eden did just a phenomenal meta-analysis that looked at what is the impact of subtle versus overt discrimination. And you might think, well, it's a lot worse to be called and to be called overtly names and be told, and be prevented. But what her research showed was that the subtle discrimination was at least as pejorative, if not more pejorative, than the overt discrimination when it came to psychological and physiological outcomes. And there's a lot of reasons why we think that is. I like to think about the fact that if you say, I don't like you because of your sexual orientation, or I don't like you because you're a woman, or because you're this or that, then I know, it's about you. It's about you, okay? But if you direct things toward me, if you exclude me, if you don't include me, if you don't give me information that would be helpful, if you interrupt me, then what I'm left with is an attributional problem. I say, are you being mean? Is this because you don't like me? Is this because I'm a member of blank? And what we think is that energy that you have to take and put into the cognitions, the cognitive effort takes away from your ability to perform. It takes up a lot of energy. And it also, not only is it cognitive energy, it feels bad when people don't like us, or when we get that feeling like somebody's excluding us. And so it's not just cognitive, it's an affective reaction too. And so it is not the case that we think when overt goes down, subtle goes up. It's that subtle is there a lot of times, and we just haven't always looked at it, and we think it's really important to look at. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Okay. So a question, stressing, psychologists, how, given the moment, how best can we, in your research on better and promising practices, how can we adapt these to create interventions for individuals whose mental health is impacted by racism and discrimination? So what kind of interventions should we be looking at, or how might we change the way we do EDI, DEI to better reflect the impact of discrimination on mental health?
So I guess I would say, I think one thing that is important to acknowledge is that mental health, like our well-being, is hugely important to everything we do, right? Mm-hmm. And that variability in our experiences day by day or week by week or person by person matters, and that organizations have an opportunity to help support well-being across the board. So that's sort of like a given, and that's what Gloria does as the president of the Society for Occupational Health Psychology. We're just going to call everybody out. Everyone we know, you're coming up. So I think all of those things are important. That's part one. Part two is, if we know that the experiences of discrimination impact well-being, mental health, what do we do about that? And I think there's multiple answers. First, ideally, prevent it from happening, right? Like, let's stop it before it happens, because then we will be protective. A secondary part of that is developing, if we can't prevent it, then we need to develop policies, procedures, practices that allow organizations and the individuals who work in them to respond to those situations in a way that promotes their well-being to the extent possible. So that's everything. In my mind, I'm thinking of things like programs through which you might take leave if you are being impacted negatively by a variety of things, including experiences of discrimination, or flexible work, that to allow you to process information as it's coming at you. So that's sort of like an individualistic perspective. But then there's also the, how do you actually create change? How do you empower individuals and organizations who have experienced discrimination to engage in a course of action that empowers them and supports them in their process, what they would like to do to cope, whether that's filing a formal complaint or looking at novel forms of justice. So I think there's like a variety of answers to that. I don't know if you had something else in mind.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of those, and I would say just two more. One is to just be aware. Like, the mental health after the pandemic has gone up for everyone. Everyone. But the numbers that have gone up for Asian Americans are huge in the United States. For Black individuals experiencing mega threats, to people who are experiencing DEI being taken away. These are huge mega threats that are impacting people. Eden's going to do a study about stress before the election. I mean, this is a mega threat for many of us. So I would just say being aware is huge. And then the other thing I think of is, we don't want to just put the burden on the individual too. We really do, as Eden said, want to make sure that organizations allow you to take time off. We should have time off for days when we don't feel well, and some of that is psychological, and some of that should be for race-related mega threats. The other thing is we really need allies to stand up and say, you know what, we're going to take some of this burden too. And that's some of the research Eden has done too on allyship and making sure people acknowledge and are aware that people are out there hurting.
So let's follow up on that question about the importance of allyship in change, but also the importance of sponsorship, mentorship and sponsorship. And so I guess I want if you can, maybe we can wrap up with this. I still have a question about what you see as your. The last question I want you to answer is what you see. If I were to ask you, okay, Eden and Mikki, you have a carte blanche. You can effect to make change. What are 2 or 3 things that would come to your mind as you must have to effect change? That's your second question. But your first one is actually to talk about allyship, mentorship, and sponsorship and how important they are.
I like that second one. I'm ready. Are we doing the difference between allyship, mentorship, and sponsorship?
Well, why they're important.
They're important because, I'm sorry. Yeah. Do you want to take that? Okay. Okay, I'll do it quickly and then you take it. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, you don't want so we're getting targeted with overt and with subtle discrimination, and that feels really crappy. And so there's a lot of research that we have done that looks at what are the strategies that we use to reduce or try to prevent that discrimination, whether we're wearing a hijab or whether we're non-binary or whether, we are a member of whether we're overweight. I'm trying to think of other groups that we haven't really talked about because there are so many. So I'm sorry that if we've been guilty of our own, of what we're calling, focusing too much on one thing. What I would say is allies are individuals who can take that burden away from those individuals and do their part to say, I see you, and I am going to step up, and I am going to help. We have to make sure that we're helping in the ways that we have to make sure that those individuals want our help, and that we are helping them in the ways that they want to be helped. So that's very important. For mentorship and sponsorship, I think we're moving from a mentorship thing to a sponsorship thing, where mentors were people who gave us advice and at a certain point in time kind of stopped. And sponsors are these individuals who say, so I'm a sponsor, y'all, not a mentor. Once you get your degree, I'm talking to my graduate students, once you get your degree, I'm not done with you. Because you got to get this thing called tenure, okay? And I have to help you at tenure. And then once you get tenure, then you have to become an associate professor. And then you're going to be a professor. And then after that, I can't help you anymore when you're on your own, okay? But it's really like watching a person progress through their entire career. I think that's really important. It's not just about what can I do for you in the moment so I get credit for giving you a little push. It's really, following through your career progression.
I would just say you can be all of those things. You can be an ally, a sponsor, a mentor. They're all good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So then the final
Change.
question.
I have a dream.
Go for it. You look ready.
Okay. I go back to Alice Agley. I think we all have to have access to the positions we want. And this is the any intersection that you can think of. This is about all of us being represented in leadership places. This is about women not fulfilling, I think it's like 70% of women or 60% of women are teachers, nurses, moms, secretaries, and those are wonderful jobs for those people who want those jobs. They don't pay enough. In fact, some of them don't pay at all. Okay, so if we saw a lot of men going into those jobs, I bet you they'd pay more. Okay, and I would like to see a world where that happens.
Yeah.
Me too.
Okay. Were you going to say anything? All right. So I think we are out of time. I can't believe it. Look at, Anyway, so I want to thank our extraordinary speakers, our guests, Mikki Hebl and King. For getting off a plane, and coming right here. So join me in thanking them.
Can we also thank you for giving us such good questions?
I want to thank my colleague and dear friend, Sandy Herskowitz, in the Haskell School of Business. Sandy, who made all of our being here possible. And so thank you, and for those of you who are here as part of the workshop. You are, as I said, in Canada's most beautiful cities, so I hope you get to enjoy some of it. Thank you. Thank you to all of you who are here for attending and for participating and sending in your questions, some of which we were able to answer. And of course, the more questions that came in highlight the importance of these conversations, and I think also highlight the fact that you think EDI, DEI is important, and you want to find ways of working together in order to ameliorate any inequities, to deal with discrimination, and to affect long-term and sustainable change. So thank you for the roles you're going to play as allies, as mentors, as sponsors, and as just as good colleagues in affecting change. So thank you for coming out. You have a copy of the book. Our authors have agreed to do some signing, and so they will be over there after the event. But give yourself a round of applause, too, for being here. And one final comment, I want to thank all the tech people. I especially want to thank the people, the colleagues in the Office of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, in the Haskayne School of Business, and a shout out to the Office of Equity and Diversity Inclusion team, the events team, and all of the people who have volunteered to make this event possible. Thank you.